Um, so I want to welcome everybody today to our core/user facilities webinar. Today we've got two wonderful panelists joining us, and I'll let them go ahead and introduce themselves. Heather, would you like to go ahead and start and kick us off?
Sure. Thanks for having us. Yeah, my name is Heather Brown. I am the User Program Manager at the Center for Integrated Nanotechnologies, which is a joint center run by Sandia and Los Alamos National Laboratories.
All right, and Rohan?
Yep. So my name is Rohan Dhall, and I'm a member of the scientific staff here at the Lawrence Berkeley Lab, which is another user facility. And in particular, the Lawrence Berkeley Lab is divided into several subdivisions. It's got a very weird organizational chart, but the facility I work at is the National Center for Electron Microscopy, which is probably going to be most relevant to all the MSA people who are going to be listening to this.
All right, perfect. So I guess we'll just start with the basics, and we can just do this kind of as a two-way discussion. But could you, either of you, and feel free to interject as needed, but just maybe start by describing what a core facility or a user facility fundamentally does. Start there.
Yeah, sure, I can go. So we're considered, our center, CINT is what we call it, is considered a user facility. So we are a Department of Energy nanoscale science research center. It's a lot of words, but again, jointly operated by Sandia and Los Alamos. So CINT provides access to staff and capabilities for external researchers to come in at no fee for approved non-proprietary research. Okay.
Rohan, do you want to describe what your facility does a little bit more detail?
Sure. So I think it's pretty much very similar to what Heather just said. There is this DOE-funded, Department of Energy-funded program called the NSRC program, and so there are several of such shared facilities across the country. CINT is one of them. Berkeley Lab is one. And essentially, we also provide access to staff and their experience, as well as infrastructure here, for people to be able to take on scientific projects from across the world. So the only couple of things I would add onto that is basically anybody and everybody can write a proposal and get access to all of our facilities here. And the proposals have to go through this competitive peer review process. But everything is done at pretty much no cost to the user. So it's kind of a cool opportunity for people who may not have all the infrastructure they need at their home facilities to do some advanced projects. And I think it works out really well for both users and for the resident staff here.
Perfect. So moving right along, maybe just, could you just talk about, and we'll go through the same order, Heather and then Rohan, if you'll talk about just some of the research that's done, some of the work that's done at your facilities, respective facilities, and what kind of collaborations that you, that maybe occur there, just a sampling of what some of the work that you do is.
Sure. So there's a really wide variety of research done at all of these facilities. Our particular facility has thrusts in a few areas. We have our quantum information systems thrust. We have a soft biological and nanophotonics. Oh, I'm jumping. Sorry, that's not the name of it. Soft biological and composite nanomaterials thrust, nanophotonics and optical nanomaterials, and then in situ characterization and nanomechanics. So just knowing those thrust names sort of gives you an idea and a flavor of the different research areas and topics in nanoscience that we span. You know, we have characterization, synthesis, theoretical capabilities. So it really sort of spans the gamut for nanoscience research.
All right. Rohan, you want to? Sure. So again, it's kind of similar to what Heather just said, even in our case. So technically, NCEM, which is National Center for Electron Microscopy, is part of a division at the Berkeley Lab, which is called the Molecular Foundry. And this division is responsible for doing research in all things related to nanoscience and nanotechnology. And the division building itself is kind of nicely segmented into individual floors, and each floor has its own core competency. So I'm just going through the list here. There is a floor for theory, which is basically a lot of people doing DFT calculations, things like that. There's a floor for material synthesis, which is people synthesizing crystals and nanostructures of all kinds. You can get access to wet labs, chemicals, all kinds of things you need there. There's a nanofabrication floor, which is basically got a really, really good clean room with some resident staff. So if you're trying to do any clean room fabrication, you can get that work done here. And then the website seems to not include the other floors, which is something I should talk to our office about. But there's a floor for something called the imaging facility, which is very, very closely allied with the National Center for Electron Microscopy. And the imaging facility has one TEM, actually maybe two, but more than that, it also has a lot of optical microscopes. So we have facilities like NSOMs, near field scanning optical microscopes. We have micro Raman systems. We have an XPS over there. And so there's a wide variety of tools, but depending on exactly what you're trying to do, and I missed one floor is dedicated specifically to biological nanostructures. And so that's something I don't do too much of, so it's kind of at the back of my head. But depending on what kind of project you want to take on, when you come to the molecular foundry, you're probably going to find an expert in the field here.
Perfect. So moving right along, and I know that this is kind of a general question, but and we've somewhat touched on this a little bit already, but what are some of the benefits of collaborating with a core facility or user facility versus if you just did research internal to your group at your home institution? So Heather, if you want to talk just a little bit about that. I know that's kind of a broad question, but.
Sure, no, that's okay. I think Rohan talked a little bit about it, like you said. These facilities were set up to help further nanoscience in the nation and then also worldwide. And so the benefit is that you may not have access to some of this state-of-the-art equipment capabilities, or you may not have access to the expertise, or the combination of the two. And so researchers and from all over can put proposals in, and they can come, and as long as it's, you have the intent to publish in peer-reviewed journals and it's non-competitive research, you can come in and access these for free, all of these capabilities, these expertise. And we also, bring together, because of that, because we're a collaborative facility, you're also going to presumably get to interact with researchers from different universities, industry, other national laboratories. So there might be some other users on site that if you wish, you can talk with them as well and talk about your research. And so just being in that collaborative environment, that collaborative facility, having access to these tools and capabilities, I think are the main benefits and why these centers were stood up by the Department of Energy.
Yeah, I think that basically summarizes just about everything that's good about these shared user facilities. I would say, so we also, just like CINT, have a really good user program or user office, which sort of helps new users as they come in through the door to make sure that they know what they need to get done so that they can actually start doing scientific research as opposed to worrying about paperwork and things. And that office also does a great job of tracking what feedback they get from users who've been through the door. And consistently, what we found is, yes, we have equipment here that probably doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, or maybe in only a few places. But more than that, it's also the experience of the resident staff that really, really helps push forward projects where, people get stuck on certain stumbling blocks while doing research. And we see all kinds of different problems. So on a given day, I might be working on a biological sample or a nanomaterial or a bulk crystal. And what inevitably ends up happening is I learn from different projects that I'm working on and help the following users using experience that I picked up, while working on a biological sample. And then suddenly there's a guy with a lithium-ion battery, which is showing some of the same issues. And so this kind of cross-pollination between fields is really hard to achieve if you're within, say, one department at a university, because no university is going to have that kind of bandwidth. It's just, the scales are completely different. The second quick thing I'd like to say, I don't know exactly how things are structured in CINT, but Berkeley Lab has the molecular foundry and NSAM, which is one thing, but we also have other divisions around here, and there is quite a bit of cross-pollination between these divisions. So for instance, there is something called the Advanced Light Source, which is its own user facility, and it has its own review process, but that is basically the world's first cyclotron. I might be wrong about that, but at this point, it's essentially a place where you can get light, highly coherent beams of light of any frequency that you like, and that can be useful for several kinds of experiments, whether it's X-ray diffraction or X-ray absorption scattering. And often what happens is users may not be able to do what they're trying to do here, but we can say, hey, this looks like the perfect system for an experiment over at that facility. And so that's another sort of level of cross-pollination that is just, it's not feasible in an individual university to kind of take on some of those projects.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'll add in, I think all the nanoscience centers, most all of the nanoscience centers have other user facilities at their laboratories close by. So yeah, you can tap into those other user facilities as well. CINT is located next to the Los Alamos Neutron Science Center, so we have some additional user facilities that folks can access, but all of those NSRCs have that, which makes for a great, just more of a breadth of expertise available to you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm just going to pause just for a second and let our viewers know that I'm going through a list of pre-prepared questions so that we can kind of structure the discussion. But if you have any individual questions, we encourage you to use the chat function. If you just go to chat me either privately or chat to all, and if you've got any specific questions, we've reserved time at the end of the webinar to go through any individual questions. So if you have any of those that pop in your head as we go along, please feel free to ask, and those will be addressed at the end of the webinar. So moving right along, we've kind of already discussed about some of the instruments that are at those facilities, but something perhaps a little bit more logistical. How would you apply for time to use those instruments at the respective facilities? Heather, if you want to.
Yeah, so all of the NSRCs work about the same, but I'll let Rohan speak for the Foundry. But all of us have open calls for proposals, depending on the nanoscience centers. And I should mention the other three that aren't represented here. So there's 5 NSRCs, nanoscale science research centers. CINT is one that's, again, located in New Mexico. The Foundry is one where Rohan is at. And then there's one out in Argonne facility, at Argonne National Laboratory. There's one at Oak Ridge National Laboratory and one out at Brookhaven National Laboratory. So, we're spread out geographically across the nation to, we have some similarities, but there are differentiating expertise and capabilities at those 5 centers. So all of them have calls for proposals every year. Depending on the center, there can be 2 or 3. I think some of the groups have 3 calls. And so you can go online. All of their systems are online, where you can go online, look at the capabilities you're interested in, the expertise you might be interested in, and submit a proposal through those open calls. And then I'll mention, I don't want to take all the time, but I think all of the facilities have some sort of we call it rapid access. So if a call isn't open, but you really need to come in and do something quickly, maybe you're trying to just get some samples because you've got a paper you've got to get out, or you're finishing up your dissertation, something like that, and you just need a couple samples. All of us have a rapid access mode where you can submit for time, for a small amount of time, to come in, get your samples done, and then hopefully get the results and get out the door.
Yep, that's basically how we operate here at the Foundry also. And so I'm just going to quickly say, I think our proposal deadline for this cycle is April 1st. So if anybody listening or watching is interested in working at the Molecular Foundry, start writing your user proposal. And again, on the Foundry website, there is a webpage which talks about what a typical user proposal needs to include. And then the user proposals are basically judged on through an independent review board. So I have no control, or nobody at NSEM, at Berkeley Lab, has any control over which user proposals are accepted and which user proposals are rejected. If I'm not mistaken, I can give you a sense of scale. So the Foundry itself probably accepts about 500-600 user proposals a year. I know that NSEM last year accepted about 120 or 130 user proposals. And the acceptance ratio is somewhere around 60-70%. Now, don't quote me on all of these numbers. These are sort of ballpark figures that I hear when we have our internal meetings. But that gives you a sense of how hard it is to get in through the door. One thing that's really sort of emphasized when new users are trying to apply for access is we recommend that they get in touch with a scientific staff member at the lab to sort of vet the proposal beforehand, because there are certain very specific things that the user review board, the proposal review board looks for. And these are not like secrets, they're all listed online. So it's all open information, but I think sometimes people overlook these very minor things, and then very, very good scientific projects get rejected because of not an administrative reason, but just some very basic things that could be avoided. I'll give you a very quick example. So suppose you ask for time on say, we have a Themis microscope, which is suited for high-speed imaging, so for doing any in situ microscopy. And I say this because that's what I do all the time, I think. But if you, in your proposal, mention that, oh, I also want to do, excuse me, EELS, electron energy loss spectroscopy, on my samples. What you don't realize is there's no EELS spectrometer on the Themis microscope, and your proposal immediately gets knocked down a few pegs because of that. And you know, if somebody wrote that proposal and sent it to me for review, I would just say, hey, take the EELS bit out, and you either include that as a separate proposal, or you maybe then think about requesting access to the team one, which actually has an EELS spectrometer. And so those are the kinds of criterion that you know, one needs to look at.
Okay. So excellent. Thank you for the detailed responses. So this is kind of another more generalized question, but how would, and we kind of already talked about this too with some of the proposals, but maybe from your experience, how do most of these research collaborations between people at your respective user facilities and other students or staff scientists at other institutions, how do those usually develop? Is that through predominantly through proposal writing or through networking at conferences, or could you just elaborate on how most of those have developed into long-lasting projects?
Sure. We do some statistics collections on folks that submit proposals. I think all the nanoscience centers do, to just say, hey, how did you hear about us and what made you submit a proposal? And I know at CINT, and I would dare to guess probably across all of the NSRCs, that it's usually at, you know, a staff member out at these national conferences, or maybe an invited talk, you know, at a university, but it's usually at that level where they're out, they're giving a talk. Hopefully they mention the center and say, you know, if this is the sort of work you could be engaged in, or if you're interested in accessing the facility, and then the collaborations usually start from there, at least new collaborations that maybe hadn't already been established. But by far, we see that it's through our staff giving talks at national meetings and university campuses where those collaborations begin. But you know, we also have to where someone could just say, hey, I guess the second would be then our users word of mouth saying, I use this facility, you have this issue, you should go and check it out. And so our staff are used to people that they haven't met at conferences calling them and saying, I've heard about your facility, I'm interested in doing this research. Because they're in a collaborative facility, they're used to, let's call it cold calls, you know, about research and helping those folks and talking to them about what the center could provide for them. And I think, you know, we have a friendly relationship with all the nanoscience centers, that if there's not something that CINT has or the Foundry has or Oak Ridge, you know, we're gonna help and do our due diligence to say, hey, maybe we don't have expertise in that area, but you should look at this nanoscience center because we think they do.
Mhm. To that point, a quick plug on what you mentioned, Heather, about going to conferences and seeing talks. Everybody should be at M&M in August to take
Mhm.
advantage of seeing these kinds of talks and things like that in
Yes,
person.
boss.
So, subtle, a not so subtle plug for MSA and M&M. So, Rohan, do you have anything to add to that?
Um, so I think I don't have as many statistics to validate what I have to say as Heather has in this case, but when I first came to the Foundry as a user, so I was a grad student who worked in an optical spectroscopy lab, and I used to do Raman spectroscopy for a living, I guess. And my boss had a weird idea and said, hey, how about we stick these things into a TEM? And honestly, we had no idea what we were doing, which is why all of that work fell flat on its face. But it was, I ended up here basically through word of mouth because I was working with somebody who was located at UCLA, and eventually they said, hey, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, there is an expert in the field who works at the Molecular Foundry, and you should go work with him. And this was back in 2012, I think. And then I actually started working here 2018. So 6 years after I left the Foundry, I returned as a member of the staff. And I find that it's kind of similar. It's a lot of word of mouth. All of our, skills are sort of listed on web pages online. So some people have actually Googled who at the Molecular Foundry knows how to do this kind of work and called me on my office and said, hey, would you be interested in working on this project? And that's definitely happened. The other thing that happens is a lot of times people walk in through the door not quite knowing exactly how their project is going to go. Now, everybody here at NSEM, every member of staff has a different sub area of kind of expertise. So I was trained as an electrical engineer. So if there's anything that needs electrical current going through it, I end up being at the room. And there's people who are more interested in computational work, so all the data analysis ends up going through them. There are people who are just good at imaging stuff, and so everybody has their own little skill set. And what I've found, when it comes to collaborations, has just been sort of internal word of mouth, which is people are here and they're struggling with a certain problem, and then one of the other staff members is talking to me over lunch or vice versa, and we say, oh, we don't know how to solve this one problem, and I'm like, oh wait, I know how to do that, that's easy, let me talk to the user, and stuff works pretty quickly like that. So that's been one means through which, I'm still quite new here, but about 3 or 4 of the collaborative efforts that have already been fairly productive have been through a mechanism like that, including, I would like to mention, a user from CINT. So,
Great.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. So one final general question, and then we'll get to some of the more specific questions asked by our participants. But do you have any? And I realize this is open-ended, but do you have any advice for researchers, particularly students who are just early in their careers, as far as how to reach out and how to incorporate research at a user facility or core facility into their ongoing work? How and that doesn't necessarily have to be specific to one particular area. It could be networking, or it could be proposal writing, or anything like that. But do you have any advice for those students, especially on things to consider as they go in their careers, and how to use these user facilities?
So my advice would be to go on to these facilities' website, really familiarize yourself with the capabilities and expertise that are available, and then take the step of taking advantage of them in a good way. That's why we're here. In fact, one of the messages, we go to conferences a lot throughout the years, the user program managers, and one of the main things is just people don't know we exist. And so we're here to say we are a national resource If you can start as a student, I mean, Rohan just gave a perfect example of he was there as a student, and, you know, I mean, it worked out great for him to come on board as a staff member, but, you know, even just being a student at these facilities, you're exposed to so many different people from around the country and so many different researchers, just nationally and worldwide. And so if it makes sense for you in your research, I would encourage you, call these scientists that are listed on the website, talk to them about how they can further your independent research, how you can utilize the facilities, and come and take advantage of them being here.
Yep, that I think the only thing I would add to that is students should just not be shy. I think a lot of times you're like, you don't want to take the first step and initiate contact and say, oh, what I'm saying is stupid and things like that. Those things don't matter. We are basically here to further everybody's scientific goals to the best of our abilities, and that's basically our job. And the other thing I would say is, I know for a fact when I was a student, the first thing I noticed when I came to Berkeley Lab as a user was just how responsive, especially the user office here was, which is not scientific staff per se, but it's just people trying to get you access, trying to make sure your safety training is done, all those little things that are very, very important to making sure that the lab is run in an organized and systematic fashion. And just how helpful everybody in the lab was in, I had kind of a crazy experiment planned out and it needed 800 different things to go right. And Berkeley Lab could have controlled 799 of them, and all those things were made to happen. And so, it's just, once you're working at a user facility, you sort of end up seeing things that you thought were impossible are actually quite possible to do. So don't be afraid of taking that first step.
Perfect. Excellent. So, so moving on to some questions from some of our participants. First question, does resident staff at these facilities do their own research, or are they only assisting with research from with users from other facilities?
So I think the answer varies per facility, but most, I think, I think at CINT, we have our staff that do perform their own research. They're actually at CINT 50% funded by CINT and 50% funded through their own research. I think that percentage varies amongst the NSRCs, but I think all of them have some percentage of their own individual research and some user research.
Yep, I think we also have a 50-50 model here. So there are staff members who are either entirely funded by the NSRC, or so in our case it's Berkeley Lab, or there are staff members who are on a 50-50 kind of model. But those lines are sort of blurry in the sense that just about everybody is doing scientific research. So, yeah, I mean, I'll kind of leave it at that.
Okay. And so another question we had is who is on the independent review boards for these proposals that are submitted to your respective facilities?
So some of the NSRCs have their external review boards posted. It's a good question. I have to look at our website to see if we do. We have about 300 external reviewers. So these go out for external review, and those are for academic, industry, other national laboratories. But I will say that they are external. So for CINT, they are external to CINT. We do not have any CINT staff members, that perform these external reviews. But we have over 300 external reviewers currently.
And for us, I don't know exactly how many reviewers we have. And I think it probably is something similar, but essentially every year we have a on-site review where, for example, for NSEM, there might be like 15 to 20 electron microscopists who are professors in different universities, not affiliated with NSEM, who come here, sit around a round table and they look at all the user proposals that have been submitted for NSEM. And I'm assuming that's the case for every single floor of the molecular foundry. So all those areas of expertise I had listed a few minutes back. Just as a side note, the review process this year will all be done remotely, so they won't be here, which means we don't get a really nice lunch because we like to treat our reviewers very nicely, and that means we all get free lunch. But besides that, I think nothing changes about the review process. It's all basically a peer review. It's very similar to how journals work.
Yeah. And each of our proposals, so they'll come in, they get assigned 3 external reviewers, and then ours have always been done online. I know it varies between the NSRCs, where there's a scoring matrix that's posted. So again, none of these are secrets. Some, the criteria are posted online. We actually, for our proposals, have a template that we request folks use. And one thing I want to note is these proposals are not big. These aren't funding proposals. There's no money that exchanges hands. So don't think of this as like a 50-page NSF proposal. Our proposals are 2-page maximum is what we require. And I think it varies a little bit, but that's about, I think 2 to 3 pages, depending on the user facilities you're looking at. So, these are smaller research proposals. So it's not burdensome. We don't believe it is.
Yep, and just another quick addendum to that, we also have fairly short proposals, and I'm just going to list out the types of user proposals from our website. These are all listed online, but there's something called a standard proposal, which is a year-long proposal. So if you submit a proposal and you activate it, you have 1 year from the date of activation to finish all your work. You can also write a follow-on proposal if you've been able to accomplish, say, 60% of what you thought you would, and research never goes the way you think it will. And that's often a big fraction of the proposals that we see is people who are doing ongoing research here. And then there are rapid access proposals, which are for very time-sensitive projects, and these only last 4 to 6 months. We also have 3 other kinds of proposals which are not so frequently used. One is an instrument-only proposal, which is if you're coming in through the door and you basically need no staff input. The second one is a sample-only proposal, which is very, very limited in scope. And these 3 proposals can be submitted at any time, so they don't have to be during the review board cycle. And the last one is a partner proposal, which is significantly harder to get going, but basically that's like a long-term arrangement between 2 institutions saying we are going to have a partnership, and that one's probably not so relevant for the average user. But basically, even if you do miss the deadlines for proposal calls, if you have very urgent work, or you can justify that it's not going to take too much staff time or not going to take too much of the Foundry resources, then you might be accommodated. And these are things that, like, the user office is there to answer all these kinds of questions, and they do a great job of communicating this better than me. One other quick thing is we also list, we have like sample proposals on our website. So I encourage users to go on there and just look at, they're divided by the area of expertise. So you'll find a model sample, a model proposal from any area of research that you're interested in, from biological stuff to hard materials. And so, you can tailor your own proposals accordingly.
Perfect. Heather, this is a question, and it's open to everybody. This is just something that you mentioned in one of your responses that I had kind of a follow-on question to. You talked about the collaboration between the NSRCs and how that users and the facilities, oftentimes, if one doesn't have a piece of instrumentation or an expertise to focus in one area, that you refer them to the other. Could you elaborate a little bit more on some of the advantages and of having this collaboration between the 5 different NSRC user facilities, and how that typically unfolds for different research projects?
Sure. I don't, Rohan just mentioned, having a CINT user that they worked with. So I don't know that it happens all the time, but I do, it happens frequently enough that we recognize that this is a great resource. We have what's called an NSRC portal. Let's see, I was trying to pull the website up. It's I can put the website on the chat. It's nsrcportal.sandia.gov. So if you go there, that is actually a portal site for all 5 of the NSRCs. And so it talks about the NSRC program, some statistics around them, but what we like to highlight, if you go to that site, up in the top hand corner, you're going to see something that an open text field says capability search. And so you could type in TEM, for example, and what it's going to do is search all 5 of the nanoscience centers, and it's going to tell you what is available at each of those centers. And then a lot of times those will also should have a contact associated with that. So then you can start to drill down and say, okay, well, here's now the type of TEM I need. And oh, I see there's one at the Foundry and I see there's one at CINT. Let me get into more details and see, you know, what specifically for my research, what may be the best one. And then you can have a contact name there as well. Click on that and then contact that individual capability owner. So that's really, I think, a great example. This was set up all together. All 5 of us worked together to set this portal site up. Needs a little bit of refining. We're still working on it, as all websites go. But I think if you're really saying, I want to be involved with the NSRCs, how do I start? Which NSRC do I even choose? This is a great starting point. So you can start to drill down and see really maybe the best case for you. And then again, if you get to a point you said, I thought this was the right NSRC, and you start talking with them and they say, well, probably this one may be a little better. You know, we all work together well. And, or like Rohan said, you know, maybe as your research unfolds, you find a new capability that you need that isn't available at the NSRC you're working with. We've even collaborated before and said, hey, you have an active approved research project with CNMS at Oak Ridge. We're going to go ahead and take that project. It's already been peer reviewed, and we're going to grant reciprocity to that project, and you can come work here at CINT because we have a capability you need under that work. So that, that sort of mode and operation works amongst the nanoscience centers as well.
So I basically have nothing to add to that except the fact that I didn't know about this website, and it's kind of cool because I'm on it right now. And
yay!
I didn't know I could do that.
Yeah.
But for us, it's a lot of word of mouth, I think, is, and the other quick thing is, so whenever people publish results based on research work that they've done here, there's of course an acknowledgement section, which is I think how a lot of people find out about us also is because they're reading a paper and they're like, oh, who did this? And so if you guys are reading papers and you come across any, you know, NSRC listed in the acknowledgements or as a co-author, you should be aware that technically speaking, you have the capability to do all that research yourself. You don't just read that paper and go, dang it, I wish I had that kind of awesome microscope. You can get access. So yeah.
Perfect. One specific question about instrumentation that we received was if either of your facilities have resources for high temperature thermal measurements, DSC, TGA, in excess of 2000 degrees Celsius. Do either of you know if those kinds of resources are available at your facility, or where a potential user might find information about that?
Rohan, I'll let you answer that one first if you have a answer on the top of your head.
I don't, because I don't work on too many thermal measurements myself. So all I did was went to the Molecular Foundry webpage, which is foundry.lbl.gov. And over there's a section called Expertise and Instrumentation, where we list all of our instrumentation. And I am pretty sure that somebody here will be doing thermal measurements. There is a TGA instrument that's listed here. From ambient to 1200 degrees Celsius is what this one says. And I don't see anything for DSC. DSC was the second one you asked?
Yes.
But I have a feeling it exists, and all I did was Google DSC, and not Google, I searched on the Molecular Foundry webpage, and 3 members of staff and their names kind of popped up. And so in this situation, what I would do is I would contact like the first member of staff, who was someone called Ann Pham, and her email address is listed online, and just shoot her an email and say, hey, I'm interested in doing this kind of work. Do you think the Foundry has the kind of stuff I'm looking for?
Right. Yeah, and I just did a search on the NSRC portal. So I did a capability search on DSC, and a number of different CINT came up, CFN came up. So Dale Huber is one at CINT who has some of those TGA DSC analyzers. So I guess the message would be to that specific individual, go to these websites. They most all of them have their capabilities set up. But if you don't want to go to 5 websites, go to the one, go to the portal, type in what you're looking for. And I think that will at least start to drill down, you know, to a name and a capability owner who you can reach out to.
Perfect. And then so one final question we have is to ask staff scientists for help on a proposal. Is it better to ask for help before starting the proposal, or to have a draft proposal as a starting point for the scientists to look over?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rohan. Being in the field yourself and receiving those inquiries, you may have a better idea of when you like to see the proposal.
I don't mind one way or another. So the proposals are not very lengthy. Going through them is not such a huge time sink. So if a user writes to me and says, hey, I'm thinking about doing the following things in just an email, which is not in a completely drafted proposal, I'm happy to give them feedback to sort of make sure that their first draft itself is kind of pointing in the right direction. But sometimes people contact me, and especially if they've been through this cycle once before, they'll end up saying, hey, I plan to do this, and I will ping you with a proposal in a couple of weeks' time. And I say, okay, that sounds great. And then they send me the proposal, and I just make a few edits and send it back to them. That's typically how things work. One thing I will say is try not to wait for the last week before the proposal deadline before you send it out to your staff contact, because yeah, we get a lot of emails during that time, and I'm relatively new here, so I don't get as many, but a lot of the stuff here, and it doesn't take long to reach that point. I think that period of time is really, really busy, and literally the moment one proposal cycle ends, you can start working on your proposal for the following cycle immediately. I think the website is actually operational at that point, or maybe a couple of weeks after. And so you can submit your proposal 4 months in advance, and there's no drawback to doing that. So just be early.
Perfect. So I think that's all the questions that I have and that were asked by some of our participants. So I think we're close to closing here, but I just want to go ahead and thank Heather and Rohan, both of our panelists, for their time today and for talking to us a little bit about the subject of user facilities and some of the specifics of their respective institutions. And so thank both of you for joining us today and for spending this hour with us. I would like to make a quick plug for MSA Student Council's ongoing webinar series. We will have 2 more webinar series this year leading up to M&M in August, including a Preparing for M&M webinar that I'll be hosting in July. And so if everybody is interested in that, please be on the lookout for information about both of those upcoming webinars. We'll be looking forward to having lots of participants for both of those as well.
Jackson, can I ask a question?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. So for each of you guys, just kind of a fun, quick question. Have either of you had like a favorite project that you've had since you've been there, or one that just like particularly caught your eye or got your attention?
Well, so I do, as the user program manager, I'm in the project management side of the house. And so I don't have active research projects. but I get to look at all the projects that come in. And so I'll be respectful to those submitting, but to say there are some interesting ones, as you can imagine, when you are an open access research facility, especially in the beginning when we first opened up. Coming from laboratories that aren't normally known to be open to the public, we got some really interesting UFO research proposals submitted and things of that nature that were fun to read, and we sent them out for external review because that's the process, but they didn't quite pass the feasibility test for the center.
I would like to say, I don't know if you guys have ever visited Berkeley as a city, but I feel like Berkeley is the kind of city where a lot of the UFO proposals might actually be coming from.
It might have come from there, true.
And so I think we've had some of those here too, which are always interesting. Yeah, but for me, I think because I have my own sort of scientific interests, which are just things that I find to be interesting. You know, there are projects that I tend to get a little more involved in just because I feel like, oh, that's really cool, or oh, that's related to something that I want to also study. And most of my focus has been on in situ electron microscopy. So whether it's heating things, cooling things, poking things, zapping things with current, those are all the things that I end up working most on. And there's also been a lot of work on Lorentz microscopy lately, which just because I was the only one with the bandwidth to take it on, I ended up getting involved in, and I'm really enjoying that. I'm by no means an expert in the field, but I think it's something I am sort of learning as we go along, and it's cool because it offers me an opportunity to grow my technical skill set and to become a better microscopist also. So yeah, I think those are the two examples I would give you for me personally, not for everybody else. Yeah.
Perfect. Are there any other questions from participants? I don't want to cut anybody off. Okay, barring none, just a couple of quick public service announcements. Just everybody, please share your contact information in the chat function, because there's an Amazon gift card drawing associated with this webinar. So everybody, please do that. And we also, as a second announcement, also record these webinars and post them to YouTube so that other people who can't join the call can access the information and still benefit from it. So if you know anybody who may be interested but wasn't able to join us today, please be on the lookout for this kind of information and tell them that where this might be available, and so they can get the information and get the benefit from it as well. So once again, thank you to both of our panelists, Heather and Rohan. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you to all of our participants also for tuning in and for your time this afternoon. And again, be on the lookout for other installments of our webinar series if you're interested in more content from MSA.
Thank you so much for having us. We're happy to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks for organizing everything. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you. Our pleasure. So, all right.